Here we are today with our HelloFresh barbecue pineapple flatbreads. Thank you to the New York City Department of Education and the Food Education Fund and At the Table for providing this for our students. Here are our steps and our equipment that we will need to properly prepare this recipe. So now let's unpackage our recipe. In your bag for your barbecue pineapple flatbreads, you should have 2 flatbread packages, 2 packages of cilantro, 2 packages of mozzarella, 2 packages of Monterey Jack cheese, 2 containers of pineapple, 2 containers of red wine vinegar, 2 packages of barbecue sauce, 2 red onions, and 2 poblano peppers. For today's demo, I'm going to be preparing half of this recipe, or 2 servings. So I'm going to put the other half of my ingredients away and save them for another day. So now we'll need parchment paper and a sheet pan. If you don't have that, you can use aluminum foil, or you can also use pan spray. I'm going to preheat my oven to 450 degrees, and I'm going to put my sheet pan in that oven so it begins to heat it up. So now, beginning with a sharp knife, we're going to begin our prep. First, we'll open up our cilantro packet, take the cilantro out, and we'll run it under cold water to clean it. We'll wrap that in paper towel to allow it to dry and set aside. Next, we'll rinse our poblano pepper and set that aside. And now that we've cleaned our produce, we can get started with our prep. So we're going to start with the onion. We're going to trim the top, and then we're going to cut it in half through the roof while peeling the outside. After I've done this recipe, I realized that a whole onion is enough for 4 flatbreads. So you certainly don't have to use all of the onions in these recipes. So now I'm going to grab my handle nice and comfortably. I'm going to claw my hand, and then I'm going to rock my knife back and forth, getting nice thin cut onions. The onions will be served both caramelized and pickled, so you want to make sure that they are very thin. So take your time with your prep. Now we'll move them into a bowl. And we're going to need about a quarter of these for our pickled onions. So just kind of break them apart and grab about a quarter of the total amount. And we're going to add our pineapple juice as part of our acidic component, as well as our red wine vinegar. Now we need the other half of the vinegar later on in the recipe, so just use half of it for now. Then we'll season it with a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper. And just mix it up and make sure that your onions are completely submerged in the liquid. Next, we'll take a nice hot pan, put a little bit of olive oil in there, and we'll take the remaining onions and we're going to begin to caramelize them. So we want to do this low and slow. We don't want to burn them. And we want to give it a nice stir. And you're going to let that cook for about 6 to 8 minutes until they start to brown slightly. So right now they're just getting started. They'll reduce about half the volume once they've cooked down, and they'll get nice and golden brown. While that's cooking, we want to trim our poblano pepper. We want to make sure we get all the seeds out of the pepper. There's not a ton of seeds here. Just make sure everything's out, flatten them. Same thing, get a good grip on your knife, tuck in your fingers, and start to rock your knife back and forth for a nice thin cut poblano pepper. These are only going to slightly cook in the oven, so you want them to be nice and thin so they don't overpower your flatbread. So just take your time to do your prep. Make sure that the skin side is facing down on the cutting board so you can cut through your poblano peppers very easily. A sharp knife is always very important whenever you are doing any of your prep and knife skills. So now we're going to take our peppers and we're going to move them over into a bowl. Carefully get them all up into that bowl and set that aside while we continue with our onions. So make sure you're watching the onions while you're working. If you need to adjust your heat, that's fine. Give them a little stir, and then you can also add a couple spoonfuls of water just to slow the cooking process down and to add a little bit of moisture to the pan. So while I get ready to prep my next set of ingredients, I'm actually going to turn the heat off temporarily. I'm going to make sure that I clean up, always keeping a nice clean workstation. And I'm just going to set the onions aside while we prep a few more things. So now we're going to start with our fresh mozzarella cheese. Again, I'm doing half a recipe or 2 servings, so I'm going to open up 1 container or bag of the cheese. I'm going to cut it in slices, cut it in sticks, and then cross-cut it into a dice. We'll take this and put that into a bowl. We're going to season it with some olive oil, a little bit of salt and pepper. Seasoning is always important along the way. Give it a little stir, and then we can set that aside. Next, we're going to take our cilantro. We're going to take the leaves off of the stems. We want just the nice fragrant leaves, and we're going to make sure that we mince them nice and finely so that we can add them to our flatbread. So in order to mince them, we're going to gather them all together, and we're going to run our knife back and forth until we get nice, small, consistent pieces. Make sure your knife is sharp so it doesn't bruise the herb. Now at this point, we should set this aside, but I, accidentally put it into my mozzarella cheese. The problem that happened here is that when it baked, it kind of took the flavor away from the cilantro. So if that happens, it's okay, but it's best to save some fresh cilantro for the end. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we're going to finish our caramelized onions. We're going to add our pineapples, and we're going to continue to cook them down. And now the sugars from the pineapples are going to start to release and help with further caramelization and flavor. We're going to prepare our flatbreads. You can either spray it with a spray olive oil, or you can take some, if you have olive oil in a container, you can just drizzle some on top. Now, of course, the flavor is best here. Spread it with a pastry brush. But if you only had regular oil, that's okay. You can use a little bit of vegetable oil, but just very little. Also, if you didn't have a pastry brush, you can spread a little bit of your oil out and just use some plastic wrap and spread it nice and evenly onto your breads. So this is going to give a little flavor, but also help get it nice and crispy. I add the rest of the vinegar to our onions. Definitely your house is going to be very fragrant at this point. We'll set that aside so that it stops cooking, and we'll use that in just one moment. I'm also going to show you how to bake this in the oven and on your stovetop, just in case you don't have access to an oven. So now let's get our flatbreads set up. We are going to take our barbecue sauce and put half of a packet on each flatbread. We can use a spoon, or we can use our rubber spatula and just spread it out nice and thin so that it's the flavor is all over the flatbread. Next, we're going to divide up our onions and our pineapple. So divide them onto each and spread that out nice and evenly. Then we will take our poblano peppers and spread them out. Now these are going to cook just a little bit in the oven, so that's why I wanted to make sure they were super thin. And one ended up being way more than what I needed for the 2 flatbreads, so I'll save that for another recipe. Now I'll split the Monterey Jack onto each one, and I'll split the mozzarella onto each one. Now the 2 methods in which we're going to cook are going to be one in the oven as per the directions, and second on a griddle pan on the stove. So I make sure the griddle pan is nice and hot, and I move my flatbread over. I take my nice hot pan out of the oven, and I put my flatbread there. Now in order to cook this on the stovetop, I'm going to put an inverted pan or an upside down pan on top to hold the heat in to allow it to help to melt the cheese while we are working. Now that my pizza or my flatbread is ready, I'm going to show you. This is the one in the oven, and this was the one on the stovetop. Both look equally just as wonderful, have nice crispy bottoms. Now let's get our cutting board. We'll move one over nice and carefully. We'll add some pickled onions. Use as lot or as little as you like, but don't overpower the whole flavor of the flatbread. And that's it. That is our serving of our barbecue pineapple flatbread. I hope that you enjoy this recipe and many others. And if you would like to see more of what we're sharing, please follow our YouTube at LICHS Culinary as well as our Instagram. We hope you enjoyed this video.